Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of Coffee with Kelly. Today, I thought I'd switch things around from talking about buying homes and things, the ins and outs of buying homes and getting loans and things like that. And I have Libby Schaefer with me, who's actually the treasurer for the Punta Gorda Historical Mural Society. And she wrote a book called, actually, I think she wrote 2 books. I have them here. Libby, maybe you can talk about the books.
Right. I didn't write Painting the Town, which was the anniversary of the Mural Society, but what I did was I did the interviews and told the stories of the people who remembered. And then The Ladies of Punta Gorda was the first book I wrote. And that's special because the mural of the Ladies Remembered was painted from that book.
The Punta Gorda Historical Mural Society, brief history on that would be that they were established in 1995. Kelly Gaylord is the current president, correct, Libby?
Yes, she is.
And you are the treasurer.
Yes.
And you have The Ladies of the Punta Gorda, and you published that book in 2014?
2014, at the request of a woman named Helen Roble, a longtime resident who wanted the ladies' stories told.
Okay, and is there a story about Helen? What is her background?
Helen came here from Ohio. She was a college graduate, and she came to Punta Gorda to escape a bad marriage. She was a victim of abuse. She came with her children because her mother and her stepfather lived here, and she said when she drove across that drawbridge, she knew she was home.
Aww.
And long history of being involved in the town, and when I met her, she knew I loved to write, and that I was a retired teacher, and she said, please tell the stories, interview the women because nobody knows how influential they were, but don't include me.
Aww.
Helen's story is in the book, and she is on the mural.
Okay.
And a big supporter of the Mural Society itself.
Now, where is that mural in town?
That mural's at the corner of 41 North, or Tamiami Trail, and Olympia.
Okay.
There's an eye doctor's office, which is currently vacant from hurricane damages, but it wraps the building. It's on 2 walls.
Wow.
And it highlights several of the important women.
And who are the women on that mural?
Oh, my. Well, of course, there's Helen Roble. There's Bernice Russell. There is Cornelia Ponder, who was the first midwife.
Oh, really?
And she was a black woman who was not allowed in doctors' offices, but yet she delivered more babies than anyone ever did in both the white and the black families in
Isn't
Punta
that
Gorda.
amazing?
There was Lois Peoples, whose family were very well known, owned much of the land, and she was here with her husband. They settled here. Sally Jones, who was the first female superintendent of schools. And it's a very interesting story how she won the position. Tosie Hyman, who was supervisor of elections. And I'm trying to make sure I don't miss anyone. I probably am going to, and as I said, Helen Roble. Let me peek.
Go ahead and peek.
Because I will
in your
forget.
book.
Yes,
peek
I
in
will
your
peek.
book.
But
and Sally Jones has an elementary school named
yes,
after
she does.
her.
Yes, and Sally Jones was someone that was very difficult to find information about. And Sally Jones Elementary School has a spectacular mural telling the history of Punta Gorda. So there is one there. I'm trying to see where Ladies Remembered is on page 64. I speak about it so often, and you know what? I always want to make sure I do not miss anyone.
Sure, absolutely. I have actually, today I had gone through some things and I found this brochure. I think I got this back in 2018, 2019. And it talks about the different murals in town and the walking tour. And Libby was saying while she's looking that up that Kelly Gaylord now does the walking tours in town, and that they do these for groups that come into the area. And they had done it for a group from Minnesota last year, and they probably will be doing that again. So we'll make sure that we get information out to everyone on how to contact them. So what did you find?
The only person I missed was Mrs. Virginia Trabue, whose husband was actually the founder of Punta Gorda, named the town after himself. She was a very influential woman. One of her best friends was in Savannah, and she was the founder of the Girl Scouts. And Virginia Trabue was very quiet-spoken. People thought she only played chess with her husband. That is not true. She's the reason there's an Episcopal church in Punta Gorda, and she was a force to be reckoned with.
Now, one of the murals, not necessarily on the women, but there is one that has Tribute and another gentleman in the area, and they did not get along.
Henry Plant.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Isaac Tribute, when he came to Punta Gorda, established the first ice house, and it was open only during fishing season. He was the reason that Henry Plant came from the north down to Punta Gorda and brought the train, the railroad, this far south. It was said that they didn't get along, and that one night Henry Plant went to the ice house and tore up the train tracks. Now, that ice house was at Berry Street, and it was still a small part of it, a very small part of the concrete was found a couple of years ago. And that's along one of the walkways here in Punta Gorda near the History Park.
Oh, wow.
But it was said they didn't get along, and he did that, thus disrupting, because what would happen is, by the History Park in Punta Gorda, behind that was an area called Drager's Farm, which many of the fishermen lived with their families. And they would load the fish up on train cars, and it would go out to near Fisherman's Village, to where the dock was, and the fish would be shipped to New Orleans, to Cuba, and to other places.
Okay.
What Henry Plant did was to stop that, so there was no longer an ice house.
Ah, is that how did they repair it? And the ice house?
It was not
that
repaired.
That was just it. That was the
and
end
at a
of
later
it.
time, Tribute tried with some investors from New York to start it up again. It did not work.
Oh, wow.
So now in town, where we have the ice house, is where the ice house was after that. And it's actually where we finally got electricity in the streets of Punta Gorda because of that ice house.
Oh, really?
It was the furthermost ice house in the state of Florida.
Wow. Wow, very interesting. And now it's a great restaurant. So if you ever are in the area and you want to go, and they have darts, dart tournaments there all the time. It's a great place to visit.
Parts of the walls are from the original ice house.
Okay. I kind of thought that by looking at the building that would be true.
Wonderful stories of the Iceman of Punta Gorda, whose daughter passed away several years ago, and his granddaughter still lives here.
Okay.
And the stories that she told about riding with her father and swinging on the cables that brought the big blocks of ice down. He would lift these 50-pound blocks of ice on his back and deliver them to the houses in the area, and even out on 776.
Wow. So going back to the women on the mural, how many of them are still around, if any?
None.
None.
It's a funny story, but yet it was done for a reason. When we decided that we wanted to have the mural, Helen Roble told me they will never agree to a mural of all women. And we all said, watch us. So we worked to get the mural, and then we realized there were so many women of influence, there could be a problem. Families might be upset if their mother wasn't included. So the first rule was you had to be dead to be considered for the mural. And got a lot of laughs, but it worked. And it was very difficult. We tried to pick women who represented education, who represented religion, who represented business, who represent all different aspects of Punta Gorda life.
Okay. And you said there was a couple with an interesting story?
Well, there are a few interesting stories. I mentioned Virginia Tribute and how influential she was.
Yes.
But Helen Roble is the reason why there is a county fire company with paid employees.
Oh, really?
There was not one. And she was a volunteer firefighter.
Oh, wow.
She would drive an Army deuce-and-a-half truck, double clutch, to the fires as soon as the alarm went off, because you see all the men were working.
Right.
And she got her friend to ride on the back, and they had a water tank which was not strapped down. Helen was a bit of a fast driver. So if she went around corners too fast, that truck would go up on two wheels, and she had to make sure to slow down. But she and her friend would go to the fires, and they would spray water on it until the actual firefighters could get there.
Wow.
She was very upset because there were injuries, and firefighters were hurt, getting there a little bit late when the fire started. So she got herself into a meeting of the commissioners and marched in where women did not go, and proceeded to tell them the story, and that we needed to have a county paid fire company. That's how it came to be, And the firehouse on 17 outside of town is named the Helen Roble Fire Company.
Oh, that's amazing.
So she was
So
influential.
what era was this all happening? What years?
Ellen came here in the 1950s, the late
Okay.
1950s, and it wasn't until the 60s that she was able to. She was determined. She loved this town, and she was determined to highlight it and do what was best for it. She was the reason many of the buildings were saved. And she was heartbroken that in the park downtown, the Hector building, which was where the town was incorporated, was torn down and not saved. But she did everything she could to raise the money to do this. But in the 1960s, that was when she was very influential. She passed away in 2014, right before the book came out. Did not know about the Mural Society plan for the book, but she was devoted to this town.
And some of this, I mean, I'm surprised that this was the 1950s, although we have to remember, women didn't get the vote till 1919. And even in the 1970s, a lot of women couldn't go into a bank and open a checking account unless they had their husband's permission, let alone get a loan or anything like
It's
that.
still not 100%, may I tell you. As a widow within the past year, I can tell you
Yes.
there are still a lot of issues that
Oh,
people don't
is
know.
there?
There's another wonderful story that Sally Jones,
Yes.
she did not have a college education.
Oh, really?
At the age of 16, you could take a test and you could teach in Florida
Oh,
at that
really?
time. And she did have 2 years at college when she got her first teaching job, which was not here, it was south of the area. Eventually, she got back to Punta Gorda. And she decided she was going to run for superintendent of schools. Now, her competition was a man named Leo Wojcicki, who was an attorney, very well known, very prominent individual. At that time, we weren't barraged with television, of course, and we weren't barraged with radio, and we weren't barraged with newspaper. Those people who were candidates would meet on street corners in town, and they'd begin talking, and people would gather around and listen to them. So Sally and Leo met on a street corner, and the townspeople came around, and when they signaled for them to speak, she said, "Oh, Leo, you go first. You should go first. You go first, Leo," which he did. And after he was done speaking, she looked at the people in the audience and she said, "Now, wasn't he wonderful? Weren't you just so impressed with what he had to say? Leo, you were amazing. And by the way, I taught him everything he knows. I was his teacher." Sally Jones won that election, and she became superintendent of schools.
And the Wojcicki family is still very prominent in this area.
Yes, they are.
Yeah,
Yes,
they have a law office in town.
Yes, they are. Very
Yep.
prominent. But that was her way of, and people loved her. She would go into the classroom and take over classes for teachers. She was very much a hands-on superintendent. And she went on to get a degree weekends and summers to make
Wow.
sure that she had her degree.
That's amazing. Some of these women, it's just amazing.
And at that
Amazing.
time, you could be a teacher or nurse pretty much. That was it.
Yeah, exactly. And what was her years here?
She passed away. I have to think back at the years.
Uh-huh.
It was 1940s, but she passed away of cancer. I don't want to be incorrect in
No,
the
that's
year,
fine.
but
But-
late 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
And another story, it was said, and I met her nieces. Her nieces still alive.
Still living in this
and they
area?
live in the Fort Myers area. And much of what I was told, because it was very difficult to get information on Sally, wasn't correct.
Oh, really?
I was told that she never married because the love of her life died during the war. That's not true. Mm-hmm. She did not marry because she didn't want to marry. Her father died, and her mother had a very rough time of it with her brothers and her, and she chose not to ever marry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's her story.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. And it's nice to hear that some of the families, if not all of the families, still have connections here.
The connections are many. Last Friday, I was able to take one of the ladies, who I believe is probably pretty much the last of the original families, to a celebration of life of a woman named Melina Heineman. Mm-hmm. And Melina was 99 years old.
Wow.
A wonderful woman with terrific stories about Punta Gorda. She was the sister-in-law to Tozy. And Tozy was the supervisor of elections. Not the first female supervisor, but the supervisor. And I don't know, would you like to hear about what Melina told me?
I would.
Well, Lena told me when I met her, I walked into her house and she had one of her 99-year-old friends there. This was in 2014. Several other friends, and said, "Sit down and we'll tell you our stories."
Okay.
And she told me that when Tozy had the election results, as many people know, she would come out and sit on the courthouse steps. And she would announce the results. Well, Willina and her friends could care less who won. They wanted to know who lost. And they all came with tablets and cardboard tombstones. And whoever lost, they would write a poem about. And Willina was really into writing poetry. They would write a poem about the person, put their name on the grave marker, and go to where the car wash is on Marion now. That was once a park. And they'd have a service and bury them. And when I said to her, well, Willina, did anybody take any pictures? And she said, sadly, no, we never took pictures. And she said, I must tell you, those grave markers lasted an hour or less because the losers were not happy.
Oh, I'm sure.
And they came and tore them down. And that was her Tosie. And Tosie was another lady to be reckoned with.
Now, did they all live in where the historical part of Punta Gorda is now?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
And you know, so many of the houses, if they're on Marion or Olympia, it was a big area where they lived. And it's funny, speaking to some of the daughters of those ladies,
yes,
they still remain very close friends today.
Oh, that's
They played
nice.
together as children.
Right.
They remember all the history of their mothers and the stories of the
Wow.
fish house and Harry Golding, who brought the hibiscus to Punta Gorda.
Okay.
And that's with them still, but they're the ones who are left.
Wow.
Many of the houses now are no longer. Willina's house was here in town, and so now she is gone. But some lived on farms outside of town, but many of them were right down in the historical district.
Very, very interesting. One of the murals in town that I had seen was the Saving Money Makes Sense. Is that where an original bank was in town, or no, that just fit
It's just
that wall?
honoring all the banks.
Okay.
When you come over the 41 Bridge South, there is the lot where Shorty's is.
Yes.
There's a sign there that
There
one of
is.
the banks was there.
Okay.
One of the banks was there. The story of the banks is really interesting. There was a time where with the Depression, they went belly up. There's a story that they were saved and they kept on going. There are ones that were strictly for lending money only. There were ones
Right.
that were... So the banks really were a big part of growth here in Punta Gorda. But no, that was just where they were able to put the mural to
murals.
remember.
And there's some murals that have disappeared.
Well, the problem is this, and it's not a problem, but it's reality.
Right.
The Mural Society is nonprofit, of course.
Right.
And it is the members of the board, the 10 members of the board, who are able to fundraise through donations and grants to have the murals painted.
Okay.
The agreement is when an owner agrees to allow their building to be used, that they have the right to do whatever they want with that building. So if they choose to tear the building down,
Yes.
if they choose to paint over the mural, that has to be.
Yeah.
So sad, and that's how we've lost some of them, and some of them we lost in hurricanes.
Yes, yes. Charlie did a number on this town. I know we just went through Ian, but Charlie really came through and kind of cleaned town. Any buildings that had been dilapidated, I'm told, are gone. There was the Punta Gorda Hotel,
Oh yeah.
which is gone.
Well, that was gone before Charlie.
That was
up in the fire.
Oh, okay.
In the fire. That was burned in the fire of suspicion that nobody has ever discovered why that happened. The one mural that involved the hotel and the famous people who came to town is no longer with us. We replaced it once,
Right.
but there were cracks in the building and leaks, and the second time it was just not possible to raise the amount of money needed again to replace it there. But there were so many famous people who came to town, you know, who are on the murals that this town had boat races. It had Thomas Edison came and stayed here. Henry Ford came and stayed here till they moved further south. Famous golfers came. It was just Firestone. This is where they all came for the winter.
Right.
And they would stay in that hotel.
Do you know, is it true part of the Punta Gorda Elks, part of the building was a cabin
It was
for
a
one
hunting.
of the families?
It was a hunting area, and one of the women, who is no longer with us, told me stories about being a child there, and they would have a hunting and fishing guide, and people would come and stay there. Some of the stories about who stayed there are not correct, so I'm not going to mention names. Unfortunately, that was very badly damaged in Hurricane Ian, and that has had to be taken down.
Oh, it had to,
Yes.
huh?
It had to be taken down.
Oh,
but
that's
that
sad.
hunting lodge, they were known people who would come who'd want to go out into the wilds to
Right.
hunt or to fish, they had a guide who took them there. And it was this was a very well-known town for fishing, for hunting.
Yeah.
It was once the largest pineapple producing area.
Wow.
It was known, for cattle.
Yes. Is it true Kings Highway was the cattle trail?
Well, it was part of it, but the stories that I loved that were great, Cattle Drive is one of the murals, which is just wonderful, off of Olympia. And the cow herders would herd the cattle into town from outside. And they would come down Old 17 into town, and they would cross into town, and then they would be loaded onto ships.
Okay.
Not too far from where one of the bridges are now.
Okay.
And they would be shipped to Cuba
Uh-huh.
and New Orleans and to different places. Very interesting story. There were 3 women's groups. There was the Fortnightly Club,
Okay.
and the Fortnightly Club were into reading books, but only books that were proper for ladies to read.
Uh-huh.
There was the Married Women's Club, and the Married Women's Club wore their hats and gloves and met for tea, which
Okay.
was very important. But there was the Civic Club, and the Civic Club became incensed because the cowboys were not watching, and the cattle were tramping on their lawns and damaging their flowers. And they put an ordinance through that was no longer allowed to happen. That was the power women had back in the day.
You didn't think they did, but they did.
But the areas in Kings Highway and on this side, that side of the bridge was really the beginning. Charlotte Harbor area was the beginning, not Punta Gorda.
Right.
That's where many of the
Right.
and for a long time there was no bridge.
Right. There's another historian that I want to get a hold of. I saw him talk to a small group at the Keller Williams for Juneteenth Day. Abraham, I think is his last name.
Oh, he's a publisher.
Publisher.
He's a
okay.
book publisher.
Yeah.
He publishes books people write.
Okay. So, yeah, and he had some very interesting things about the Port Charlotte side, but I digress.
Wonderful
into that.
stories.
There really are. Libby, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about it. Now, where can people get your books?
Well, Painting the Town is only available through Copperfish Books downtown.
Okay.
The Ladies of Punta Gorda is available through Copperfish Books. And then my other books. I wrote one on 9/11
Okay.
of interviews, and I just had one come out now called My Mother Said, stories about mothers of all over the United States. There are 6 books plus this. The 9/11 book, Our Brother's Keepers,
Okay.
and My Mother Said, and the lessons I learned are available on Amazon, Books A Million, and Barnes & Noble.
Okay.
All my other books are available at Copperfish and some other independent bookstores. But
Bookstores.
Copperfish is the best.
Well, very good. Well, thank you so much. I have loved the stories. I love history. I hope that you all do too, and you'll tune in and share this with your friends and family and get to know the Punta Gorda area, Charlotte County area a little bit better. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.